Hey guys, I'm back from my training out, and I have a lot of really interesting stories to share with you. I've got enough that I'm going to break them up into two parts, this being the first. I'd love to put them all in one entry, but I just haven't had a chance to write them all down yet. I didn't have anything too crazy happen while I was out there, but we did have one incident with a rookie that I still found kinda relevant. Since I'm sure you guys have been waiting for these, I'll just get right to the stories. I'll assign each batch of stories to the person that told them to me. KD. KD is a vet who's been an SAR officer for about 15 years. She specializes in high elevation mountain rescues, and is widely considered one of the best in her field. She was one of the more enthusiastic storytellers, and since we were together a fair amount of time during the exercise, she ended up telling me about 4 that really stuck with me. The first she told me asking about her most traumatic calls. She shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently up on the mountain, since potential for nasty accidents is significantly higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parts she works at had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said. One of the worst on record as far as weather goes. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple of days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some climbers. They warned people to stay in the mapped areas, but of course there are always those who just don't listen. In one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided that he knew better than the officers and the officials, and he took them out to an area that just wasn't safe. They were snowshoeing, and as best as KD could figure out, they walked onto a shelf that looked solid, but it actually wasn't. It gave way, and this family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed at the rocks at the bottom, and the parents died instantly. One of the kids did as well, but the other 2 survived. One had a broken leg and fractured ribs. The other was almost unharmed, save for some bruising and a sprained ankle. The uninjured child left his sibling behind and set out to find help. KD said that the kid didn't make it more than a half mile or so before the storm just overtook him. The kid stopped to try to get warm or maybe to rest, but ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding the family with the help of some witnesses who saw them heading out into the wilderness, and she was the one to find the kid who had frozen to death looking for help. She said it had started to snow, just enough to obscure long-distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting up ahead in the snow, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described in detail how that when she got closer, she realized first that it was the child, second that they were deceased, and third that they had frozen over one of the most pitiful positions she had ever found a corpse in. The kid was sitting upright, knees tucked up against his chest, his arms wrapped around him and his head tucked into his coat. She moved and took the coat off of his face, and she saw that he died crying. His face was twisted, but there were tears frozen on his cheeks. She said that it was painfully obvious that the kid was terrified when he had succumbed to hypothermia. As a mother, it just broke her heart. She told me repeatedly that she hopes the father is burning in hell as we speak. The other traumatic story she told me about stood out in my mind was the one that happened when she was a rookie. Her team got a report of an experienced climber who hadn't come home the previous day. His wife was concerned that something bad had happened, because he never failed to come home. They went out looking for him and had to climb what sounded like some very technically challenging parts of the mountain. They got to a relatively flat area when Katie started to see blood in the snow. She followed the trail, and as she went, she started seeing little bits of tissue. She wasn't exactly sure what part of the body they had come from, but the further she followed it, the more there was. She follows this blood and tissue trail to a sheltered area under a cliff face, and there she finds the climber. She said there was so much blood it was more than she had ever seen before. He was lying face down, one arm stretched in front of him, almost as if he had died crawling. She looked closer and could see that he was partially disemboweled, which was obviously where the tissue had come from. The guy had his ice pick turned into his hip holster, and it was just covered in blood. Of course, they'll never be exactly sure what happened, but she said the best she can figure this is what went down. The guy had been attempting to climb into the next area, and he was using his ice axe to ascend. He'd probably hit a loose patch of dirt and fallen. On the way down, or possibly when he landed, he had gotten impaled by the axe, and that is what disemboweled him. He dragged himself along, tearing pieces out of himself as he went, and he died under the cliff face. She isn't terribly bothered by gore, but I guess a few of the guys who came to help out and to help her take the body threw up when they turned him over, and a good portion of his intestines spilled out too. I mentioned to her that I was interested in hearing about any experiences she had with people completely disappearing. Her eyes lit up and she leaned close to me. "You want to hear a real doozy?" she asked. She tells me about how, when she first started, there was a case that got a lot of attention in the media. A family had been out berry picking in an area of the forest that was close to the entrance of the park. They had 2 little boys, both of them under the age of 5. At some point during the day, one of them just vanishes. There's an absolutely massive search, and they find absolutely nothing. It's another one of those cases where the kid was just never there in the first place, you know? The dogs just sit down and don't pick up on anything. Not even a trace of the kid is found. The search goes on for about 2 months, but is eventually called off. Fast forward to 6 months later, the family comes back to place flowers at a memorial that had been set up there for the kid. They bring the other son. While they're placing flowers, they lose sight of the kid for about 3 seconds, and in that span of time he vanishes directly into thin air. Now, obviously the parents are devastated. It's terrible enough to lose one child, but losing both is just beyond imagination. The search is huge, one of the largest in state history. There are about 300 volunteers combing every inch of the park looking for the kid, but again, there's no trace of him. The search goes on for about a week, with people looking miles from the part of the park where he vanished from. And then, almost 2 weeks later, a volunteer almost 15 miles from the designated search area radios in that he found the kid. They had assumed that the kid was dead, but the volunteer said he's not only alive, but he's in good shape. KD and her kid go out to recover the kid, and when they get there, they can't believe that this kid had been missing. His clothes were clean, there's no dirt on him anywhere, and he doesn't even appear to be traumatized. The volunteer said he found the kid just sitting on a log, playing with a bundle of twigs that had been bound together with old rope. KD asks him where he's been and who he had been with for those 2 weeks, and the kid tells her that he's been with the Fuzzy Man. Now, KD firmly believes in Bigfoot, so of course she gets all excited and asks, what does he mean by fuzzy? Was he hairy? But the kid says no, he wasn't hairy, he was a fuzzy man, and describes the man to be blurry, like when you close your eyes but not all the way closed. He says the man came out of the trees and took the kid deep into the woods. The kid says he slept in a hollow tree, and the fuzzy man gave him berries to eat. KD asks if the man was mean and if he scared the kid, but the kid says no, he wasn't scary. But I didn't like that he didn't have eyes. KD says they get the kids back to headquarters and the cops take him to talk more about what happened. She's friends with the cop that talked to him. She said the kid described as being kept in the tree by this fuzzy man and given berries whenever he was hungry. He was allowed to wander around a specific area, but when he tried to go further, the fuzzy man would get man and yell real loud even though he didn't have a mouth. The kid got scared at night and the fuzzy man made it go brighter, and he gave him that twig bundle. He said that the fuzzy man was going to keep him, but he had to let him go because the kid wasn't the right kind. He either can't or won't elaborate any more on that. The cops are sort of just left scratching their heads. The search for his brother is renewed with no results. The kid has no idea where his brother might be, and they never find him. The last story that Katie told me was of something that happened to her when she got separated from her training group when she was a rookie. She was learning the basics of high elevation on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the restroom. So she went off about 50 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. The rest I'll tell you exactly as she told me. So I go to take a piss, and once I'm done I start going back to the group, but I've only gotten 5 feet when I realize I have no idea where I am. And this wasn't an "oh, I got turned around" lost. I mean, I literally had no fucking clue where I was. If you asked me, I don't even think I would have been able to tell you what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia feel, you know? You're completely lost and have no idea what to do. So I just stood there for a while, trying to figure out where the fuck I am and what I was supposed to do. But the longer I stood there, the more confused and turned around I got. So I started walking. As I recall, I just picked a random direction and went for it. As I'm walking, it's just getting worse and worse, to the point where I don't even know why I'm on a mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through snow, and then I start hearing this voice. It's kind of inside my head, almost. Like if a frog could talk all low and croaky, and it's telling me over and over, "It's okay, you just need to find something to eat. It's okay, find something to eat and you'll be okay. Just keep walking and find something to eat. Eat." So I start looking around for anything I can eat. And I swear to God, I've never been more hungry in my entire life. It was bottomless, and I think I had just eaten about anything you would have put in front of me right then. I had no concept of time, so I had no idea how long I had been out there when I heard an actual voice coming towards me. I go toward it and see it's another one of the SAR officers, and he looks fucking terrified. He's running towards me, asking me if I'm okay and what the hell I was doing out there. And the scary thing was, as he's running towards me, I see myself reaching for my hunting knife in my belt. And I'm not even really thinking what I'm doing, but what I'm thinking is I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'll never be okay again. So I just have to eat. He sees me doing this and he backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away and that he's not going to hurt me. And that all kind of snaps me back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am and I put the knife away. I run toward him asking how long I'd been gone, thinking he'll tell me like a half an hour or so. But he tells me I was gone for 2 fucking days. I had gone over 2 peaks and ended up on the other side of the mountain. And if I kept going, I would have ended up wandering into about 300 miles of wilderness. They would have never have found me. He can't believe I'm not dead. And of course, I don't know what the fuck to think. To me, no time had passed at all. I don't say anything, I just go back with him to the rendezvous point and I'm taken to HQ and airlifted to a hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests to try to figure out what happened. As best they can guess, I was in some kind of weird fugue state, which is kind of like amnesia, or had a weird seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is, we don't really know. It's never happened again, but let me tell you, ever since, I never go up there alone. People rag on me for making them come with me when we have to leave the group, but I just tell them that listening to me take a piss in the snow is a lot better than losing me for 2 fucking days on a freezing mountain. The next person I talked to was EW, a former trainer who now works as an EMT. He still comes to ops like this to help out, but doesn't work full time for us anymore. He specialized in finding lost kids. He just seemed to have a sixth sense of knowing where they had gone. He's a legend among the senior vets, too. But he gets embarrassed if you compliment him on his work. He sat down with me at dinner one evening and we ended up swapping stories. Most of them were just casual, but we got to the subject of our weirder calls. I mentioned that I had a buddy who had gone up a set of stairs. He kind of got quiet and asked me if I heard of a little boy who disappeared from this park a few years back. I hadn't, so he told me the story. They were out looking for this 11-year-old boy, Joey, who had gone missing near a river. Of course, the first thought was that he had fallen in and drowned. But when they got the dogs out, the dogs led the SAR officers away from the river and up into a densely forested area. When we do searches, we search in a grid pattern, and we search every box of the grid incredibly thoroughly. What EW's team noticed right away was that a very strange pattern was emerging. Dogs in alternating squares were picking up Joey's scent, but losing it when they overlapped into another box. Think of it like a checkerboard. Joey's scent was being picked up in random black squares, but never in the red. This, of course, didn't make any sense, because how could a kid bounce from one area to another without leaving a scent over each area that he had passed? EW's and his partner look into a new grid of the box. EW notices a set of stairs about 50 yards away. He tells his partner that they need to go check out the area near it, but his partner flat out refuses. He tells EW that he made it a point never, ever to go any stairs that he sees, and that while it may be routine, he's not pretending that it's normal. He tells EW that he'll wait in sight while EW checks. EW says he's irritated, but he felt for the guy and didn't want to push him on the subject. So I walked over to the stairs and they were small, kind of like a set that goes into the basement. I don't feel really strongly one way or another about them. The stairs, I mean. So I wasn't scared or anything. I guess I'm like everyone else. I just prefer not to think about them too much. Anyway, I went over and I could see that there was something lying on the bottom step, sort of curled up. My heart sinks because, of course, you always hope for the best. And we were confident that we would find this kid alive, because he had only gone missing for a few hours, but right away, I knew it was him and that he was dead. He was curled up in a little ball on the step holding his stomach. It looked like he had been in horrible pain when he died, but I didn't see any blood, except for some on his lips and chin. I radioed in that I had found him and that his body needed to get back to command. That fucking poor family. They were just devastated. The parents couldn't understand how he'd been dead, because he had only gone for such a short amount of time. And on top of that, we didn't have an obvious cause of death, which made it worse. I figured he had probably eaten something poisonous since he was holding his stomach when I found them, but I didn't want to guess. It's hard enough to hear that your kid is dead, let alone some stupid search and rescue guy asking about what happened. They took him away, and I went home and tried not to think about it. I hate finding dead kids. Man, I love this job, but it's one of the reasons I left. I've got 2 daughters, and when I think of losing them, He choked up a little here. I'm not great with emotional stuff like that, and it's always sort of awkward to see a grown man cry, so I didn't know what to do. He pulled himself together eventually, though, and kept going. We didn't hear back from the coroners about the cause of death. It's not really our job to know, I guess. And sometimes if they think there's foul play, they won't tell us because of legal bullshit. But I've got a friend who works for the sheriff department, and he'll usually pass along anything interesting if I ask. In this case, though, I actually got a call from him about a week later. He asks if I remember the kid, and of course I do. He says that some seriously weird shit is going on. He tells me, EW, man, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but the coroner has no idea what happened to this kid. He's never seen anything like this in his life. My friend goes on to tell me that the coroner opened the kid up and he couldn't even believe what he was seeing. The kid's organs were like Swiss cheese. Quarter-size holes were punched clean through every single organ the kid had, aside from his lung and heart. But his colon, his stomach, his kidneys, and even one of his testicles were full of these clean holes. My friend said that the coroner described it as if someone had taken a hole and punched holes through everything. They were so neat, but the kid didn't have a scratch on him. No entry or exit wounds, nothing like that. The closest anyone had ever seen was a guy who had filled himself full of buckshot a year or so back while cleaning his gun. No one had a clue what could have possibly caused this. My friend asked me if I ever heard of anything like it or anything similar in the past, but I have definitely never even heard of something like that, and I told him that I wasn't going to be of any help. As far as I know, the coroner determined the cause of death was something like massive internal bleeding, but no one knows what really happened to the kid. I've never been able to forget that kid, and I have nightmares about it sometimes. I don't let my girls go into the forest alone, and when we go together, I never let them out of my sight. I used to love to be out there, but that case and a couple others just sort of ruined it for me. Dinner was over, so we started to clean up and head back to our cabins, but before we went our separate ways, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me real close. He tells me that there are bad things out there, things that don't care if we have families or lives, or that we can think and feel. He tells me to be careful, and he walks away. I didn't get a chance to talk with him again, but that story stuck with me. By pure coincidence, I got to talk to another vet, PB, who's been in the SAR field for years. We were partnered on a grid sweep during a training exercise. We were chatting casually about how much we liked the job, what kind of things we've seen and stuff like that. At one point, we passed an old set of stairs that was probably from an old fire lookout. Given the area that we're in, I casually mentioned that I was curious about the stairs, and that I wished to know more about them. He got kind of quiet and looked at me like he wanted to tell me something, but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he told me to turn my radio off. Obviously, this is something we're never, ever supposed to do, but I did, and he did the same. He tells me about 7 years ago, he was out on a call with a rookie. They were in an area of the park that had a lot of strange reports and events. Disappearances, stories about lights in the forest, odd noises, things like that. The rookie was totally spooked and kept going on about the things in the woods. According to PB, the guy wouldn't stop talking about the goat man. Just on and on, goat man this and goat man that. Finally, I told him that there was plenty else to be afraid of out here that was real, and that he'd better get over this thing with the goat man. The rookie wanted to know what kind of things I was talking about, and I just told him to shut up and walk. We crested a little ridge and there was a staircase about 10 yards ahead. The rookie stopped dead in his tracks and just stood there, looking at them. I tell him, see, that's something to be afraid of. The rookie asks me what the hell they're doing out here, and for some reason, I just open up and tell him the truth. Or what I've been told is the truth. I could have gotten in a lot of trouble for doing what I did, and I could get in a lot of trouble for repeating it to you, but you're a nice kid and I want you to stop looking into this. Quit while you're ahead. So, I'll tell you what I know. Under the condition that you never breathe a word of this to your soups. I told him I wouldn't say a word, and he double checks that our radios are off. When I first started out, we were a little less tight-lipped about them. Other things that happen out here, you know? We would warn people before we even hired them that there was weird shit going on. I guess the Forestry Service was tired of such a massive turnover rate, and they wanted people to know what they were getting into. So they started having people sign these agreements that they wouldn't go to the media about whatever they saw. The Forestry Service didn't want to scare people away, so the last thing they needed were spooked rookies running off to the media with ghost stories and haunted stairs. But eventually, they found that the agreements weren't necessary. People not only didn't want to talk about what they saw, they wouldn't talk about what they saw. A few times the media tried to get people to talk when kids or hikers would disappear, and no one would say a word. I can't really explain it. I guess we just don't really want to admit that anything's wrong. This is our job, and to be out in the woods every single day, we don't need to get spooked. And the best way to do that is to pretend like everything's okay. So, I'll tell you everything I can think of, and after that, I'm done talking about it. For good. And I expect you not to bring it up around me. Ever. The stairs have been out here as long as the parks have existed. We have records going back decades describing them. Some people go up them and nothing happens. Other times... Look, I don't really like talking about this, but sometimes really bad shit can happen. I saw one guy get his hand sliced clean off as he got to the top step. He reached around and touched a tree branch, and it all happened so quick. 1 second his hand was there, and the next it was gone. It was a completely clean wound. We didn't find his hand, and the guy almost died. Another time, a woman touched a set of stairs and a blood vessel in her brain exploded. Literally exploded, like some kind of water balloon. She sort of stumped down and came over to me. All she got out was, "I think there's something wrong with me." And she dropped like a sack of flour, dead before she even hit the ground. I'll never forget the way the blood leaked into the inside of her eye. Before she died, I watched it turn red. I watched it happen, and there wasn't a single thing I could do to help. We warned people not to go anywhere near them, but there's always at least one jackass who does. And even if nothing happens to them, something bad does always happen. Kids go missing as we're on their trail. Someone dies the next day, cut in half completely in a safe part of the park. I don't know why, but something bad always happens. I don't know exactly why they're out here, but it doesn't matter. They are here, and if we're smart, we tell our new officers exactly what they're capable of. We both went quiet for a little while. I was afraid to talk because I wasn't sure if he was done. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, and finally he spoke up again. "Have you ever noticed how you can't find the same ones twice?" I nodded, expecting him to continue, but he just stayed quiet, walking alongside me. Eventually, he just started telling me the story about the biggest deer he'd ever seen in the park. I didn't bring up this subject again, and I didn't want to press him for any more stories. He dropped out of the op the next day. Apparently, he left before the sun came up and said he was sick. None of us had heard from him since. I'm going to stop here for the time being. I'll try to post the next part in the coming days, but with it being the end of summer, things get pretty busy here. Thanks for the continued interest, guys. You've really awakened up this curiosity in me that I didn't even know I had. I apologize for the short update, guys. Things have gotten a little crazy around here, and I'm not sure how often I'll be able to update going forward. I really do appreciate all the support you guys have given me, and while I only have a couple stories to share with you, I'll definitely be interested in what you think. A firefighter at the time of the training op told me about this call he had gone on, supposedly to help rescue a kid from an absolutely massive tree. He said they didn't give him details, just that they needed him to come out and they lacked the proper equipment. He had been called out specifically because the thing was so huge that the SARs didn't feel safe trying to climb it. He'd been a tree trimmer before he joined the VFD, so it was easy for him to grab his old equipment and come out and help. He was let out about 2 miles, and the team stopped at one of the biggest trees in the area and pointed up. He laughed and asked the op captain how the kid made it up there. made some joke about the old cat in a tree thing, but the captain just shook his head and told him to get up there and get the kid down. He said he knew something was up, but he didn't push it. He said that he climbed the tree. He started wondering if they were playing a prank on him. There was no way a kid would have been able to make it up this fucking thing. It was massive at the base, and about halfway up it started tapering. I almost turned back a few times because I really didn't think it was going to hold me. But he said he kept going, and when he got to the top, he saw a flash of blue on the branches. I saw the kid's shirt caught in a branch, and I called out to him, asking if he could come to me. But he didn't say anything. I kept moving, calling the kid's name and telling him not to be scared, that I was there to help him. By the time I got to him, I knew he wasn't going to answer me. I found him, or what was left of him, cradled in the fork of a branch. And the fact that he was up there was sheer luck. If he had fallen any other way, he'd have come crashing down. It wouldn't really have mattered though, because this kid was dead long before he ended up in that tree. I don't know who put him there, or how, or why, but it was fucking sick. The kid's intestines popped out of his mouth and they were hanging in the branches. It was like it was some sort of fucking sick Christmas tree. The way they were draped over everything, it was fucking awful. I got a better look and saw they had even popped out of his ass. His guts were hanging out the bottom of his pants and his eyes were just gone. I assumed they were pushed out by whatever force caused him to pop like a fucking stress ball. You ever see a body that's been floating in the water for a long time? How their tongues kind of swell up and stick out? He was like that. I remember because there were fucking flies crawling all over it. I think I must have gone into shock or something because, man, I pushed that kid down with a stick I broke off a branch. I just kind of poked him until he fell. I don't know why I did that. I almost lost my job because of it. But, man, the thought of hauling that kid down over my shoulder the whole way, gathering his guts and coiling them around me like some kind of rope so they wouldn't get snagged, I couldn't even do it. I've seen a lot of dead kids, more than I'd ever admit. I've seen a kid who hid in a bathtub full of water during a house fire. It boiled him alive, turned him into literal soup. But this, I didn't know what did this, and the thought of touching that kid's body made me feel like I would lose my mind. I heard him hit the ground and I figure everyone would freak out, but they knew he was dead and that's why they sent me up there. They didn't say anything. They didn't shout or freak out or anything. I got to the bottom and got right up in the captain's face, asking him why he was sending me up there when they knew damn well the kid was dead. But he told me it was none of my concern and thanked me for getting the evidence down. I remember the way he said that. I remember it specifically because it was so weird to hear it phrased that way. The evidence. Like he wasn't even a real person. Like he had never been a little kid who got lost and something fucking unspeakable happened to him. The captain and crew led me back out of the woods, but he and 2 others stayed behind. I thought that was weird too. Why wouldn't they help me get the kid out? I tried asking the guys leading me out and they just told me they couldn't discuss an open case. I asked him what he thought happened to the kid and he got really pensive and thought about it for a bit. I would have said crash injury based on how his guts came out like that, but with those injuries, you see massive contusions under the skin. You know, obvious trauma. This wasn't like that. It was almost like this kid got caught in a big vacuum and his guts got sucked out. But even then, there was no trauma. None at all. It bothers me, man. It bothers the hell out of me. One of the vets at the training app reads No Sleep and he recognized my stories. He knows me pretty well and we've swapped stories before. He asked if I could share something that he's noticed about the stairs, and some thoughts he had as well. I'm really glad you decided to share these. I think it's important that people are aware of what's out there, especially since the Forest Service does a good job of covering it all up. I asked him what he meant. What do you mean, what do I mean? The lack of any kind of media attention? No coverage of missing kids or bodies found miles from where they got lost in the first place? David Paulites hit it right on the head. The Forestry Service is doing everything they can to keep people coming here, even if it isn't safe. I mean, to be fair, it's not like these things happen every day, but the numbers add up and it's worth looking into. Especially the stairs. I was surprised you didn't even mention the flippy ones. I didn't even know what he was talking about. I couldn't remember anyone ever talking about something like that. He seemed somewhat incredulous. Dude, I can't believe you've been with us this long without seeing them. No one told you about them? I just shrugged and asked him to elaborate. Well, there's the normal stairs, the ones that pop up and that go out a ways. I know you know about them. But sometimes I've ran across ones that are flipped upside down. I guess it would be like if you had a dollhouse and the stairs were its separate piece. Now, flip it upside down so that the top step is in the dirt, and put it out in the middle of the fucking woods. They're like that. I don't see them often, but they're odd, to say the least. Makes me think of footage taken after a tornado, when houses are blown apart and random things are left standing, like a chimney or garden walls. Those ones, they freak me out more than the normal ones because I can't write those off as easily. I don't scare very easily, like most of us who work out here, but that idea stuck with me, and it bothers me. I'm going to try to find out more about them. He also mentioned how many people are bothered by the guy with no face. He got really excited and told me that he had seen something similar. I was out on a training exercise a few years ago, and I was camped out in my tent and I heard something walking around outside the camp. We're told not to wander far, which you know, so I wondered if maybe it was a rookie who had gotten up to pee and couldn't find his way back. You remember that guy in our group a few years back who almost fell off the damn mountain? Well, I'm paranoid about that happening again, so I got up to see what was going on. I went to the edge of camp and called out to whomever it was and told them that camp was this way. But they just kept going back out into the woods. So, naturally, I went after them. I know it was stupid, but I was half asleep and I just really didn't want to deal with some idiot getting hurt. So I followed this thing on dead straight course for about a mile, and then it stopped near the edge of a river. I could see the vague outline of it because the water reflecting the moon. It looked like just an ordinary guy. He had a pack on, and it looked like that he was facing me. I asked if he was okay and if he needed help, and he just kind of cocked his head to the side like he didn't understand me. I always have this pocket knife on me, and it's got this little thumb light attachment to it. So I turned it on and lit up his chest so I wouldn't blind him. He was breathing slowly and deep, so I wondered if he was sleepwalking. I went closer to ask him if he was okay, and I moved the light up. And something didn't seem right. So I stopped. He kept breathing in his real slow, deep breaths. And I sort of figured out gradually that that's what was bothering me. It was like he was pretending to breathe, but not actually doing it. His breaths were too even and deep, and his movements were kind of exaggerated, like his shoulders going up and his chest moving out. I told him to identify himself, and he made this muffled noise. I moved the light up, and I shit you not, this guy had no face, just smooth skin. I freaked out and I fumbled with my light, and I saw him moving towards me, but he didn't actually move. I don't know how to explain it, but 1 second he was at the edge of the river, and the next he was 5 feet away from me. I never even looked away or blinked. It was like he moved so fast that my brain couldn't keep up. I tripped and fell on my ass, and I could see this line open up on his throat. It stretched up to his ears. His head tilted back and he smiled at me with his throat. There wasn't any blood, just this gaping dark hole. And I swear it was a smile. A smile back at me with the gash in his throat. I got up and ran as fast as I could back to camp. I couldn't hear him following me, but I always felt like he was right behind me, even though when I looked back I couldn't see him. I calmed down when I got to camp and the fire was still going, so I guess the pack mentality of being around other people made me stop and, breathe a little. So I waited by the fire to see if he followed me, but I didn't hear anything for a few hours, so I went back to bed. I know it sounds weird, but the whole thing was just so surreal that it almost felt like I immediately wrote it off as my imagination. We were telling ghost stories one night before bed just to scare each other and poke fun at whoever got creeped out. Most of the time, it's the rookies, but one woman told a story that actually managed to get under my skin a little bit, and I know it must have been the same for others. She said it was true, but then again, every story told around a campfire is true. Somehow, though, I don't think she was making it up. It had that ring of truth that only really traumatizing events have. She said that when she was a kid, she and her friend used to go play in the woods behind her house, that she lived in northern Maine. There was a lot of dense, unpopulated national forest area. She said the woods weren't like they are here, that they're so thick in places that the trees block out the sun completely. She and her friend grew up there, so they weren't really scared of being out there alone, but they always maintained a sense of caution in certain areas. She said that it was never really talked about, but they always knew not to go out more than a mile or two beyond their homes. The adults never said why, but it was an unspoken rule that no one ventured out too far. She said that her friend made up these stories about bears as big as houses that lived out there, that they used to scare each other by hiding and making growling noises while the other one searched for them. She said one summer there was this awful storm that blew down a lot of trees and set part of the forest a few miles behind her house on fire. Fire crews got it under control, but she said some of them came back not quite the same. It was almost like they had been to war. You could tell who had really gotten scared because they had the same look on their faces. I think it's called shell shock. My friend said that they were like walking dead people. They didn't smile or say anything if you went up to them, and most of them left town as soon as everything was over. I asked my parents about it, but they said they didn't know what I was talking about. Once everyone had been told that the woods were safe again, my friend and I decided to hike out to where the fire had been. We didn't tell our parents where we were going. It was pretty exciting to think that we were disobeying them that way. We hiked out about 2 miles or so. We started seeing burnt trees and stuff. I remember that my friend got really upset when we found the skeleton of a deer curled up under a tree. I practically had to drag her away from it. She wanted to bury it, but I didn't want her to touch the antlers because they were weird. I can't remember why, I just remember thinking that there was something wrong with them, and I didn't want either of us to even go near it. The farther we went, the more burnt that everything had gotten. Eventually, there were just no standing trees. It was almost like being on another planet. There was almost nothing green, just brown and black everywhere. We were standing there looking at all of it, and we both heard someone shouting in the distance. I panicked because I thought it was my dad and that he was going to yell at me and tell me that I was grounded. My friend broke off and hid behind this big rock because she said she didn't want to get caught out there. Her parents had forbidden her to go out into the woods at all, and she had lied and told them that we were going to a movie. I followed her, but we kept listening. I could hear this voice getting closer, and I realized that they were calling for help. I thought that maybe it was a hiker who had gotten lost and needed directions back to town. That kind of stuff used to happen all the time, so I was used to helping people out. I could hear him following my voice, so I kept calling out to him in the distance. He got closer and closer, and I could see that his face was all red. I told my friend to give me her pack because she had a first aid kit in it. She made this noise that she was grossed out or something. She asked if I saw his face, and I told her to shut up. I jogged over to meet him. I stopped about halfway when he stopped in front of me. I could see that his nose, lips, and part of his forehead were just gone. It was like they had been sliced clean off. He was bleeding bad, and I saw that the knees of his pants were red too. I took a step back, but I was too scared to move too much. He grabbed my shoulders, and I felt like I got a shock, and he jerked back. He started babbling, and I couldn't tell what he was saying, except that he kept asking how long he had been gone. He asked me where his unit was, but I just shrugged my shoulders. He looked me over and saw my Walkman and screamed. He just kept babbling and touching his face, and I realized he wasn't wearing the right clothing. He had some kind of weird gray cloth jacket and formal pants on. The jacket had these weird buttons outlined in red borders on it. I just kept shaking my head and told him that I didn't understand what he was saying. I went to open the first aid kit, but he just screamed again, and the only thing I could really understand was, "Don't touch me. You'll make me go back there." After that, he just kind of ran off. I could hear him screaming the whole time. When I couldn't hear him anymore, I turned around and my friend was crying. We just turned around and started walking back towards town. She asked me over and over who that was, but I didn't say anything. When we got home, I told her that I didn't want to play in the woods with her anymore. We're still friends, but we don't talk about that guy. Not ever. I'll update as soon as I'm able to, guys. I really appreciate the continued support. And speaking of support, I would like to thank my $10 and above patrons: Paul Z, Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, Chaos X, JY, Pyromancer, Hayden MH, and Dan R. Guys, thank you so much. It makes you make the channel able to exist. I really appreciate it. And if you would like to join these guys and the ones in the description who are $5 patrons, go to patreon.com. Make sure you go show the author some love. I will link the story in the description. And patrons get Patreon-only stories. I am currently working on the next one. It'll be up in about a week or so. So make sure you go over there and show me some love there too. You get your name read off. You get a Patreon-only story. The last one was over a mile long. Okay, this is turning into a long show. Guys, head over to Patreon. Thank you.